Awesome. Okay, welcome. So feel free to go ahead and write some questions in the chat. If you guys would like to use your voice, you're welcome to do that too. Please just keep in mind that your voice would be in the YouTube recording afterward. If you don't have immediate questions, I'm going to answer a couple questions that came via email, and then feel free to just start writing things in the chat and I'll catch up with that. One of the questions I got was from a woman who said that her ex is taking his new supply to the same vacation spot where they would always go on their anniversary. And she wants to know, was that intended to hurt her, or was that intended to demean the new supply? And it's probably both. That's the reality. I mean, that's just a really crappy thing to do. Like, really, of all the places in the world, he couldn't come up with a better place, like a new place somewhere else to take the new supply. Oops, just close that out. He had to take the new supply to the same place that he would take his ex on their anniversary, like a very special place that was, sentimental for her, clearly meant nothing to him. I don't know how she found out. I'm assuming, he made it really obvious so that she would find out, so that it would hurt her. And I'm sure while he was there, the new supply was asking some questions, and he probably used a great form of triangulation to mention his ex and how they used to always come here on their anniversary. That's just a super, super shady thing to do. So if you should ever see that, that's a big red flag. I'm really sorry that happened. She also mentioned, she had some fear of flashback triggers, and she wanted to be able, to enjoy things and enjoy life. I wasn't certain if she meant to go back to that place or not. And if that's the question, I would probably recommend not to go back there, because, there's so many places in this world, so many beautiful places in this world. I mean, even in one little area, there's probably other resorts and hotels or bungalows to rent or Airbnbs to rent. I would never go back. I would cut free from all that, because places do retain energy. Places retain memories. If you broke up with someone, with like one of these narcissists, and you stayed in the same place where you shared a lot of memories together, that probably haunts you for a long time to come. If it was your space that they entered, that you were there a long time before, that's probably better, because you at least have many years of memories before that person. There's things you can do, to energetically cleanse the area. We like to use white sage here in USA. It's probably from the Native Americans. Down in South America, they use palo santo, which is like a piece of wood, also an incense, and you smudge it. You buy a big bundle of sage dried online, and it's all bound together, and you light the end on fire, and then you blow it out, and then the smoke is just going, and you hold like a little ashtray, or a lot of people like to use an abalone shell, and you just walk through the room, all the doors, all the windows open, everything is open, and you just walk through the house and you just smudge everything. And while you're doing it, you're visualizing that you're cleansing the space of all the negative, the old energy. You're getting rid of all that, you're clearing all those old memories, sending all of that back. However your little ritual goes, you make up your own ritual. It does generally help to have some kind of incense like that. The sage, for whatever reason, is really powerful as a purification. So is the palo santo. You can cleanse your body too. You can run it all around, like maybe, several inches above your skin, and you can just let the smoke kind of brush all over you. That's good to do outside to cleanse your auric field. But if you live in a space where they came into and it's still your space and you're not leaving your space, I would cleanse that really, really well. If you're not so attached to your space, if you shared mostly memories with that person, or worse yet, like you guys got that apartment or that flat or that house together, and then he left or she left, or for whatever reason, you're the one left there, I would consider leaving if it's really haunting you. Every time I've left, and sometimes I've gone very, very far away. And for me personally, that was just the easiest way to deal with it, was just to get out. to not be around there, to not have those, you know, the place with the memory, because it would be like every time I would turn around the steps, I would be thinking of the time that he did that, or every time I went to the kitchen and did this, it triggered the memory of that. And there's just way too many triggers. For me, I found staying in the place. Like my first instinct is like to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's not always possible. Sometimes people own homes. Sometimes people really, really want or need to stay, you know, for familial reasons or work, or, you know, their kids they're sharing or somewhere else nearby, or they financially just can't move, you know. And so if that's the case, then you need to make that space your own again, you know. So something that's really cheap and really helpful is to do the smudging with the sage. And another thing you can do that's not very expensive is to get some paint. You know, like gallon of paint is probably like $20-30 depending on the quality you get. You get a couple gallons of paint and just like redecorate your apartment, your house. Like maybe it's just your bedroom or the living room or a few little spaces in your space. And, you know, it's not very expensive, but it's a great way to like totally change the energy. Like you add a whole different color and the whole energy in your space changes. And suddenly it no longer reminds you of that person who once shared that space with you. That's what I would do if it's at home. You know, in the situation of the vacation, like in this woman's question, I would just not go back. I mean, I would just find another beautiful place to explore on this big, vast planet and enjoy that instead and make new memories and not go back. I mean, like, even if that was like your family vacation, you know, you took the kids there and everything, I would make new memories, build something beautiful, something new in the future, create something new with your kids so they're not, you know, triggered back and thinking about that. Because, you know, and what this guy was doing with bringing the new supply there, that's just incredibly hurtful. It's just incredibly hurtful. And it's very typical. It's a very typical kind of behavior because he gets to hurt the old girlfriend or wife and then hurt the new one and, you know, create some triangulation and get some narcissistic supply from that. So that's an unfortunate situation. Someone added in here, yeah, another form of sadism. Yeah, it is, because he's getting pleasure from that. He's knowing that it's hurting her, and he's knowing that it's hurting the new person, because there's no way he took the new person there and didn't say a thing about, you know, the ex, the vacations. There's no way he went through that trouble and didn't say anything. I'm sure he was doing that. That's just how they roll. And it's just better to cut free from all that. Consider that the paraphernalia. You know, it's like keeping the photos and the sweatshirts and the letters and the text messages and whatever, the emails, it's all paraphernalia. Going back to the same vacation spot, another form of paraphernalia. It's going to trigger you. It's going to make you upset. It's not really going to go anywhere helpful for you. Another question I got from someone, she was saying after she and her boyfriend of like 18 months had spent she said like a nice day together, right after that, he texted her and discarded her. He said, you know, he wanted time alone, and then he just gave her the silent treatment and wasn't responding. And, you know, she was devastated by that. And that's happened to a lot of people. That's usually a borderline move. From my personal experience, the borderline usually gets really triggered. It could happen with narcissists too. As soon as you get close, like as soon as you have a really almost intimate, like as close to intimate connection as you can have with them. And I don't mean sex. I mean like emotionally. Could be sex too, but certainly emotionally, that will terrify them and they will go running. Like as soon as there's that connection, I was dating a borderline guy once, and we're dating for like a month, and we didn't have sex, but we were at his apartment and he was giving me a massage, and it was like midnight, and all of a sudden he stopped. And he was like, excuse me, I'll be right back. And he went to the bathroom. I was like, okay. And then like a little while went by and I'm like, okay. And then he came back and he was like, hey, I'm sorry, but you know, I really need to ask you to leave. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I was like, so confused, like just blind, like why? I don't understand, you know. And that's kind of a typical borderline move. I had a friend who was dating a guy who, you know, they were dating for several months, I think, and there were some issues. you know, like where he was introducing her as a friend and not his girlfriend to his friends when they ran into them, some kind of shady things like that. And then right after they had had sex and she was living like in the same little, not like apartment, but complex or something of that nature. They were like right across the hallway and they had just had sex and they were like laying down. It was late at night. And he was like, so, you know, you should go now. And she was like, what? And, you know, essentially he was just like, he wanted her out of his space and he was, you know, joking or rationalizing, you know, why he needed to have his space and he had to work tomorrow and whatever. And, you know, when you see this kinds of behavior, that person has some intimacy issues. They have some attachment disorder where, you know, as soon as they start to feel close, intimate connection with another person, they push you away like very hard and very fast and maybe even totally disappear after that. That's a very typical move. And if you see that, don't go back. Don't try to rationalize. Don't try to convince them of anything. Don't even try to like rationalize, but it doesn't make sense because we were just doing this, remember? And you said that, and like this was happening and we were sharing this. Like, don't even try to rationalize that because none of that's going to work. Like, they made up their mind. They wanted you out. They don't want that closeness, that intimacy, that connection. That's not a healthy person to be around. And no, you are not going to be able to like help them open up. Don't think that's going to be you because it's not going to happen. You know, maybe that person down the road gets into therapy and works it out, but chances are probably not, you know, and you don't want to be sticking around, you know, waiting for that to happen. When it happens to you, I mean, easier said than done, because when you're in the moment, it is so devastating because it's like, it's the cognitive dissonance. Like you just shared this really intimate, close moment together. And then right on the heels of that, they throw you away. And it's like, it's such a mind fuck that like, you can't understand it. And you're just like trying so desperately to understand why someone would do that and what's wrong with me and what did I do and what should have I done differently? Or what if I would have done that instead of that? Don't waste your time. Best just to cut that off, go take some healing time, and then open yourself up to meet someone new, someone quality, someone healthy, because that's not healthy. That's not a sign of a healthy person at all. Like normal people, after they have sex, they want to be together. They want to cuddle. They want to hug. They want to be very close. You know, people who are getting to know each other, who are very interested in each other, they're going to want to spend time together. They're not going to be like, suddenly, you got to leave. I need you out of here. That person doesn't want you around. And, you know, I'm really sorry, you know, to that girl who went through that and to everybody who's been through that, because I know it is devastating, but the best thing to do at that point is to understand that person has a real problem and you can't fix them. And the best thing you can do for yourself is to get away. Someone says, that happened to me. I had an awesome night with my ex-narc and boom, the next morning, he wasn't even talking to me out of nowhere. And the silent treatment lasted for 4 days until he discarded me. Right. That's exactly the same thing, right? Exactly the same thing. You had that really awesome time. You felt the intimate connection. They felt triggered by the attachment. They can't have attachment. So pushed you away and ran away, discarded, you know. And yeah, I'm sorry, you probably can relate to that sense of like the desperation of like, why? And like, you just want them to explain it to you. And the more you want them to explain it to you, the harder they're going to push you away. Maybe they even humiliate you, or maybe they just totally disappear and never, ever, ever tell you. This other guy that I dated several years ago, so I kept making him wait to have sex so we can like get to know each other, you know, and see how it was going. And then don't you know, right after we had sex, and it was like a Saturday night, it was not a work night, you know, he has to go. I'm like, are you serious? Like he didn't tell me before we ate dinner and all this. So he's out and disappears, the silent treat gone. And I'm like, I don't understand. It was good. It wasn't bad. Like nothing weird happened. Like, and he's just gone. And years went by, and I moved here to Portland and I was on a dating site, and sure enough, he found me on the dating site and he was still in the other area. And he was like, oh, hey, just to let you know, I felt really bad. about, you know, just disappearing like that. And I wanted to tell you that, you know, I was going through a really hard time, and I had just found out that, you know, I had a child with this other woman on the other coast, and I didn't know, and, you know, things weren't working out, and I was really stressed about that, and I didn't want to tell you. And I was like, And then he tells me that he's moving to my city here to Portland. I'm like, wow, okay. It was for his work or whatever. It was obviously, it wasn't related to me. And he was like, you know, let's get together and have a coffee. And I was thinking, all right, sure, let's have some closure, because that was pretty devastating for me. And my body somaticized that. So I was sitting there on my porch smoking cigarettes, because that's how I would deal with the stress back then. And I'm smoking and just like, why? Like, why would he do that? Why would he disappear? Why isn't he texting me? Why isn't he calling me? And I went to stand up from my chair, and it was like an electrical switch went from on to off. You know, the muscles run like a positive and negative current. And it was like the switch went off, and my legs and back went out under me. And like, I just like collapsed on the ground. My legs didn't work. My lower back would not hold me up. My whole support was gone. And he had back issues. And I thought that was kind of odd, but the back thing was so bad that I couldn't even like extend my arm for days, because something was so messed up. It took me a long time to heal from that. And then, you know, so down the road, so anyhow, we find each other on the thing. He says he wants to have coffee. We set up a date, and I just said, you know, let me just confirm with him before I go all the way out there. And sure enough, he's like, oh, hey, sorry. You know, we gotta, you know, put that for another day. I got to do this thing. I'm like, okay. So we set another time, and, you know, then like right before the time, he's like, oh, sorry, I told somebody I would work. And I was like, okay, so we're done with that. No more chances. That was like years ago. I left, I came back to the city, and a couple months ago, I'm walking in my neighborhood, and who's walking across the street but this guy? And I was like, no shit. So I was like, hey, how's it going? And I just kept moving. I didn't really want to stop. But we reached out and hugged each other. And in that moment, I thought, I saw something, like there was like the return of the karma. And for weeks, maybe even a month before that, my back was hurting me again. And it wasn't as bad as it was years ago, but the same kind of pain and issues were happening. And sure enough, after I hugged him and physically touched him and walked away, the back pain was gone, like gone. And I don't know, something weird happened, but that was just like a bizarre experience. Sometimes the universe will give you these weird synchronicities. Maybe sometime down the road, you see them on the internet and something, you know, comes full circle, or maybe you actually run into them and it comes full circle, or you just hear about them down the road. And sometimes the universe is kind that way in giving you some kind of confirmation of like, that wasn't about you. That wasn't, you know, your fault. This person has like real issue. And sometimes things just come full circle like that. But if you see that sign of a person going from, this is amazing, to complete silence and discard, that's a person with an attachment disorder, and that you're never going to be able to be close to that person. It's always attachment. The idea of attachment is triggering to them. They're going to reject that. So this person who said that it happened to her, she said, it drove me crazy. I had to play detective since he wouldn't speak to me. I found out he was planning to get rid of me for a while if I wouldn't comply with his controlling tactics. If I didn't catch him planning to discard me right then and there, he probably would have kept using me for a while. Yeah. Sometimes we get really lucky when they do discard us, you know, because they just save us from more heartache, as painful as it is, you know, when it just suddenly, because the discard is devastating. And if that's ever happened to you, sometimes, you know, we leave them, but every now and then that discard happens like that. And it's so painful because you just don't have any answers and you don't understand why. And it's so sudden and unexpected, and the cognitive dissonance and everything, you know, but in the long run, lucky that it was ended and over, you know, rather than staying around for more of that. Someone asked, do you think the narc ever feels remorse for what they have done? I don't think so. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I mentioned that the borderline personality, you know, they say they tend to have a short window of remorse, like immediately after the abuse or the rage, the psychotic rage that they do, or whatever happens, there tends to be a very small window of potential remorse where they can see what they did, and feel remorse, but that passes very quickly. And, you know, it's not long lasting. Usually that down the road, that person has rewritten the history. It didn't happen that way, or they didn't do that, or they only did that because you did this. And they wouldn't have done that if you hadn't have said this or something else. You know, there's some other way of blaming. For typical narcissists, for typical cluster B personality disorders, they just don't have remorse. They don't, because they don't have the sense of conscience that you and I have, which tells us this is right and this is wrong and we should choose right. They know right from wrong, but they know that their conscience doesn't work like most people. Like Dr. Simon mentioned the other day, you know, like they choose wrong and they fully know that that's wrong. They fully know that that's not what everybody else does, and that's not, you know, the standard of society, and they feel entitled to do that. That's that sense of entitlement of the narcissistic spectrum, where they believe they're special. They believe they're superior. They believe they are above it all, above everyone else. They are exempt from the rules. And that's why they don't have remorse, because if they're so special, if they're so, you know, above everybody else, superior to everybody else, the rules don't apply. So there's no need to have remorse. They should be able to do it and get away with it, I think, is how they pretty much approach that. And, you know, one of the most frustrating things to do is to try to call them out on something that happened in the past. You know, if you've ever tried to call out a narcissist on something that, you know, happened yesterday or the week before or the month before, and you never addressed it, you let it go, and then it just kept bothering you and bothering you. So you finally bring it up, and maybe you even do it in like a really mature adult way. And you're like, you know, I'd really like to talk about this because when you did that, I felt very hurt. Okay. That's a really mature way to approach that. Oh, Venus, it's okay. Sorry, she was dreaming. That's a really healthy way to approach it from that kind of emotional standpoint versus you did this and I felt so hurt, because now you sound like a child, right? But if you approach that from a very adult, mature, emotional way, and that person's like, I didn't do that, that didn't happen, you're imagining things, you know, you're too sensitive, oh, I would never have done that if you weren't, you know, all of that is gaslighting, it's rationalization, it's excuse making, blaming you, guilt tripping you. Like they have no remorse for that, you know, especially the further behind things are, you know, trying to talk about the past things. They don't own up to that. They don't. And then they'll find very tricky, clever ways of making it sound like an apology sometimes. Some of them just flat out don't ever do that. And some of them will make it sound like an apology, but you have to listen very carefully to listen for the externalization of the blame. You know, if they blame, you know, well, that's just the way parenting was. I'm sorry, I didn't know any better. No, that's not an apology. You just blamed parenting, but not all parents were like that. You didn't own anything. You didn't own the fact that you abused your kids and hurt your kids and scarred them emotionally for life, you know, that sort of thing. No. Or the person who says, well, you know, you said that, so I did this. Again, I'm sorry, but you did this. That's not an apology. That's a blame. It's a very clever way of disguising the blame and confusing the person and making them think that maybe they had some remorse. So in these situations with these people, I would not ever assume that they have remorse for anything that they've done. You know, even if you get to that point where it kind of seems like they're admitting it, listen very carefully to the language that they're using, because their language will usually give them away. You'll usually find that they're hiding the blame, the guilt tripping, the rationalization somewhere in there, so they don't actually have to own it. Someone says, oh, that person earlier said, I left him twice and he hoovered so bad. Thank the Lord he finally discarded me. So much easier. Yeah. Sometimes it is a lot easier when they just discard, even though there's that initial period of like, what happened? How did that happen? Just desperately trying to figure it out. She also said she listened to Dr. Simon in one of his videos say, narcs don't have enough fear, so they don't fear their actions will have consequences, which is why they don't stop to think about what they're doing when they hurt someone. Yeah. He mentioned like the fear, the anxiety, how they don't have enough of that, right? And, you know, I think some of them, like the sociopaths who are extremely covert, who plot and plan grandiose con situations with, you know, companies or countries or a large group of society, you know, like people are affecting a large group like that. I do think they think a bit about consequences, and that's why they're so covert with what they do. They hide everything so carefully. They always leave the plausible deniability because they're very aware that what they're doing is wrong. They're very aware that there are consequences, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure that those consequences never, ever, ever catch up to them. You know, everything they can do, they will go out and lie. They will deceive other people. They'll get flying monkeys and create smear campaigns and, you know, pin the blame on someone else at work and then spread that rumor around. I mean, they will sacrifice a scapegoat, you know, destroy someone's career or their life plan or something like that. They don't care. They know what the consequences are, and they don't want to go to jail, and they don't want to lose their career and stuff like that, which is why they so cleverly hide it, you know, and pin it on someone else and be sure that they get away with it. Oh, she says, true, good way to put it. That's just been my experience with them. You know, the more covert they are, the more they do this, the more they very well understand, you know, the repercussions of their actions, which is why they're so carefully hiding them. Yeah. Also in that series I mentioned earlier, The Fall, where they're featuring this psychopath, the serial killer, and they're talking about fear at a point. And I don't want to give it away too much. I'm just going to recommend you guys watch the series. It's only 2 seasons so far. It's called The Fall. I really recommend watching it. It's great. It's going to keep you hanging on the edge and just hearing some of their perspectives about the mind of a psychopath. And I think there's 2 characters on the cluster B personality disorder there. So I'll be really interested to hear from any of you guys who end up watching that too, if you got some insight out of that. What else? What other questions do you guys have? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, here's a new one. I met a guy the other week and he asked me out on a date. I'm not looking for a relationship as it is probably too soon, but I figured I might as well try it out. It was a wonderful date and he was completely different from my ex. No love bombing or rushing into anything, which I think is good. But at the same time, I was trained to want the intense love. The no love bombing almost makes me think this guy doesn't like me. I feel like my narc wreaked me because I now question everything. Yeah, so this is a really common thing that a lot of people talk about after they get out of a relationship, you know, with one of these personality disordered individuals and they start dating again, whether it's, you know, right away or down the road. Most people generally, you know, comment, you know, I just don't feel it. There's no chemistry. There's no spark. It's just not interesting. It's not intense. And what that is like, it's like from the addiction, right? So, you know, when you had been with this person before, and if you had always been with these types, right? If that's all you ever knew was you meet someone, however you meet them, and that's when it's game on. It's like all day long. It's like texting. It's like phone calling. It's like emailing. It's like seeing each other. It's like sex all the time. If you got used to that at some point, you know, and someone always telling you you're so beautiful, you're so attractive, you're so handsome, like, and constantly flattering you. If you got used to that, sure. When you meet someone new, it's going to be like, was this person really like me or not? If they're not doing that, right? But that's a sign of a healthy person. Someone who's not doing that kind of intensity, what they call the fabrication of emotions, because that's what the psychopath does. That's what the narcissist does. That's what the borderline does is, you know, they fabricate those intense emotions with all that attention. And then all your time and attention is going to them and thinking about them and obsessing about them and all of that, right? So like you're getting on a brain high. And then afterward, everything else feels so dull, you know, and that's normal at first, which, so you're kind of, if I remember you're kind of in maybe the first month or so, kind of the initial recovery stages. So it's probably going to feel even more drastic to those of you at the very early stages. You know, usually it's better to wait some time to date. Oh, 3 months. I'm sorry, 3 months of breakup, but 1 month no contact. Okay. So yeah, in the initial stages, it's going to be a lot more drastic, the change. You know, for me, getting back out into the dating world recently after like 6 months, 6, 7, 8 months of no dating really was, you know, meeting. So you find the narcissist right away. They're the ones love bombing you. They're the ones who are saying backhanded things like, you know, what's your digits? If I like your voice, I'll ask you out. Don't answer that. Don't answer that at all. Just ignore those messages, you know, that kind of thing. Or like, hey, beautiful, I really like you a lot. I think we have a lot in common. Like, you don't know each other at all. You don't know a thing about each other. Like, how do you think we have a lot in common? He doesn't. She maybe is just putting that out there to hook you in. Just ignore that stuff. Don't even give that a chance, because that's like the major red flag from the get-go. Major red flag. Now, say you meet somebody and you go on a date and have a great conversation. It's not like passionate, crazy chemistry firing, because honestly, I think that kind of thing is a bad sign. I think that's a sign of someone who's, you know, possibly one of these cluster B personality disordered. Also, like that crazy, crazy, crazy chemistry at the beginning could be like a sign of one of these, you know, like soul contracts, like the soulmate that you had in another lifetime, and there was like major karma left unresolved, and you see each other and that karma's there, and that's what that crazy sexual attraction is, and then it fizzles and burns out real fast, or it just gets crazy, you know, angry or, you know, dark or something very fast. Like, that's usually not a good sign. I think that a sign of a healthy new connection, it involves a bit of calmness. You know, this person that I met recently, he's approaching me slowly and deliberately. He's not rushing into anything. He's not calling me all the time. He's not texting me all the time. It's like a few texts a day. We see each other a few times a week. And then, you know, we both have time to do our thing and be ourselves. And, you know, when we see each other, he's not flattering me. Like, he doesn't flatter me. He said like a couple complimentary things, but there's no flattery at all. There's none of that, you know, fabrication of emotions and, you know, trying to get you to transfer your approval. There's none of that. And he's not like playing the, I'm so interesting, everything about me is so interesting. There's none of that happening. You know, he's very calm and deliberate, and he has confidence, but his confidence is not cocky. His confidence comes across as gentle and strong together. It is both gentle and strong. So it's not like, you know, he's not out there super arrogant and cocky. That would be a sign of a more narcissistic tendency person. So getting back into the dating arena, I recommend clearing all those old belief systems of, you know, what you thought it should be, or what it always was, or what you expect it to be. And when you're sitting with that person, you know, instead of like thinking and imagining so much what that is and what that's going to be and what's going to happen, breathe a bit, right? And focus your energy in your body and in your intuition, and ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Like, how do I feel right now in the presence of this person? You know, do I feel calm? Do I feel peaceful? Do I feel a little bit nervous? That's normal. You're meeting someone new and you're figuring them out, you know, but the question is, do you feel ick? Because if you feel icky or like, yeah, or like just really uncomfortable, like self-conscious, probably not a good situation. So always do the intuitive check-in. Like, how do I feel right now? And then after you see that person, you go home and you start doing your thing. Then ask yourself again, how do you feel? How do you feel the rest of that night? Or how do you feel the next day? You know, do you have like lots of energy? Are you really clear? Are you really focused on your work and what you got to do? And it's like you have this extra like spring in your step? Or do you feel like exhausted? Like you can't focus, you can't think, you're questioning maybe things that happen on the date or like things they said, and was there a double entendre there? And that's one of the key signs of a narcissist too, is the double entendres. You know, they'll say something and it's double speak. It has a double meaning. So it sounds like it's one thing, but it means something else, you know, and it's a very clever way of disguising the plausible deniability. So if you're afterward, if you're questioning all this and in your gut is kind of like feeling weird, probably not a good situation. So use the intuitive check-in. Your intuition knows, your gut knows if that person is, you know, a positive person to be around or not. And in the past, you know, the danger was that you got swept up in that initial intensification of the brain high. And so you lost the whole thinking brain. You know, you lost the connection with your actual intuition because your intuition was like so quiet and so calm and so soft compared to this massive, intense brain high that was happening from the fabrication of emotions. Oh, good. Someone new says, okay, they just found the chat button. Awesome. I keep finding myself in scapegoat roles at various times in my life. Is this a sign I have a lot of narcs in my life? And that I am doing something that puts out the please hate and ostracize me vibe. I am strong, not a pushover, but still. It's very possible that you were raised in one of these situations. You know, were you the scapegoat in your family? Because where did that pattern start? If you're finding yourself constantly surrounded by people who are doing this, and if there are people scapegoating you, quite likely, most likely, they're somewhere on that cluster B personality disorder. It could be a narcissist, could be a psychopath, sociopath, borderline. They always have a scapegoat. They always have maybe multiple scapegoats. Always people to push the blame on, always people to accept the responsibility. You know, you describe it as, are you putting out the please hate and ostracize me vibe? Possibly. Because if that's a pattern that you learned early on, could be in childhood, could have just been earlier in your adulthood life, you know, maybe you got into a work situation or a relationship and then it started, and then you started identifying with that pattern, and that energetic hook kind of got you. And you want to work on that, because if you get rid of that charge, if you get rid of that hook, then they don't have anything to hook onto anymore, because you have to be enabling that in order for it to keep going. Like if you take it on, if you take on the blame, or if you like if they provoke and provoke and provoke you to react in public in front of other people, and then everyone points the finger at you and blames you, you know, then you've fallen into the trap, because that's what they want, right? And so in order to not enable that is not rationalizing it, not making excuses for it, and not giving them the reaction that they want, you know, because they want you to look like the bad guy. They want you to look like the crazy one. They want you to take on all of that. And if you don't give them that, it doesn't work. The game only works if we play along, and the game gets really boring if we don't play along. They have to find someone else to play the game, and they're going to try and try and try. Like as soon as you start to change the rules and you set new boundaries, because that is the way forward, is setting new boundaries. And the boundaries first start with yourself. You got to get really clear with yourself about what you're going to tolerate and what you're not going to tolerate. And you got to get really clear with yourself about what you value and what's important to you and what's not so important. And you don't really need to defend that stuff so much, you know? And so be very clear about those boundaries. And as you set those new boundaries, you know, you start saying no, you start, you know, not giving into this or that, however it is that they're twisting you into that, they're going to be very angry at first, you know, and don't react to that. They're going to try to shame you. They're going to try to put guilt on you for having those boundaries. That's the clearest test of a toxic person, is when they try to shame you and guilt you for having a boundary, you know, that protects you, a very reasonable, healthy boundary. And that's when you know that person is very toxic. Don't compromise your boundary. Don't go back on the boundary, because if you do, then they know every time they're just going to be able to keep walking all over you like a doormat. And it gets really painful and frustrating in the moment because they're angry, but you have to hold your ground. You have to hold that boundary. And, you know, depending on this relationship, where you're meeting these people, you know, if they're friendships or work, co-workerships, or, you know, intimate relationships, you might need to get out of that situation, you know, because typically that person's not going to change. typically what happens is when the codependent, right, when the other person sets the boundary, the relationship starts to change. You know, it starts to fall apart basically, because there's no more dance. Like, they're not dancing together. They're not playing together. So the narcissist has to go find another victim to play that game, because that is their game. They don't give up on that game. They're going to try and push and push and push you until you give in. But if you don't play that scapegoat role, they're going to have to go somewhere else for someone else to do that. She says, interesting. It's less me blowing up than it is someone getting mad and blowing up at me, than making it a huge deal and drawing in others. Okay. So this is when they're like feigning indignation, like outrage, like, oh, I can't believe you would do such a thing. And, oh, I'm just so outraged, you know, which it's no different than like the school bully who's like terrorizing kids at school. And then, you know, he gets caught, and then, you know, he acts outraged, you know, and as if that means it didn't happen, or that he wasn't actually the aggressor. It sounds like that's what you're dealing with here. Yes. Okay. Good idea. The toxaholic using shaming. Good red flag. Yeah, that is the red flag, is when they try to shame you and guilt you for the boundaries. You know, so it sounds like you understand this person's shtick now. You get their game. Their game is you don't give them what they want. So then they act, you know, all upset. You know, here's an example. Say you set a boundary with the door, you know, like you're like, no, don't come at this time, I'm busy. And the person comes banging on your door and you don't answer. And then they're getting really angry, and they're like really, really making noise in your door. And they're like, you know, the whole neighborhood is just seeing, and you're at home, but you told them you're not going to answer because you couldn't answer. So, you know, you're not compromising on your boundary, because if you go and answer that door after you said you weren't going to answer that door, then now they know they can keep walking on you. If you say no and they get upset, and then the next time you see them, they're like, you made me feel so unwelcome, right? That sort of deal. That's the guilt tripping, and it's the blaming, right? That's a no-go. That is a toxic, toxic, toxic person. That person respects nothing about your space. That person respects nothing about your time. That person feels entitled, superior, exempt from the rules, you know, that you should just accommodate them whenever and whatever they want. Get rid of those people from your life. You know, don't hang out with those people as friends. Don't, you know, do business with those people. That was a former business partner of mine, you know, and he tried to shame me and guilt me into that boundary. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You have to hold the boundary. Know that you have the right to have that boundary. And for those of you who have grown up, you know, in families where this happened, you have really old programming probably that says you don't have the right to have boundaries. Because if your mom was the narcissist, she was always going through your underwear drawer. She was always going through your finances. She was always meddling in your shit. Or she was going through your trash can, you know, and telling you, well, it's trash and trash is fair game, you know, or something like that. You know, that person has no boundaries. They have no respect for your space. So if you learned that as a child, and you learned that you didn't have the right to have boundaries, or you didn't have the right to close your door to your room when you wanted some privacy without her just like barging right in, or insisting that the door, you know, constantly be open because that was the boundary. There was no boundary, you know. So if you have the old programming, it takes a while to remind and convince yourself that you have the right to boundaries. We all have the right to boundaries, and boundaries are necessary. And we happen to be in the last 2 weeks or so of Mars retrograde, and Mars retrograde meaning it appears to be moving away from Earth. And so during that, Mars has to do with boundaries and with action and with the masculine energy. And so during the last 2.5 months, you know, until the end of June, we have been working on these boundaries, and man, the issues have been coming up, like test after test after test with boundaries. And this is a great time to redefine those boundaries. And again, that starts with yourself. Your first boundaries start with yourself, because when you set that boundary with the other person and they come at you with, you know, guilt and shame, you got to be clear with yourself, right? You got to be so clear about that boundary with yourself that you don't compromise it yourself. right? Because that person can't compromise that boundary if you don't let them. You know, if you insist this is the boundary, you know, versus if you're like, well, okay, you know, and then you just give them what they want again. So get really clear on those boundaries and get really clear with yourself first, and know that you're going to follow up. You're going to enforce that boundary. You're going to set it and you're going to enforce it. And you have every right to do so. You don't have to feel guilty. You definitely don't have to feel guilty about that. Yes, X infinity. You nailed it. Okay. So you get it then. All right. What else did I miss? Okay. Someone else says, yeah, it's so ironic. One narc told me I needed to get a backbone. So I did. I created boundaries. And then she told me I was a rude snot. LOL. No winning with these people. Correct. You're never right. You never win. That's the whole game. The whole game. Because even if they told you they want this and you have to do this to earn their love or to earn their approval, and then you do this, now suddenly they want that. You're like, what? But you just said, and you know, and it'll drive you mad. That's why it's called crazy making. It will drive you crazy. When you see the consistently inconsistent, the flip-flopping, consistently inconsistent, that's a big sign of one of these cluster B personality disorders, you know, these manipulative people. She also says, my mom went through all my stuff. She'd bring it up years later and embarrass the crap out of me. Yeah, isn't that lovely? That's really lovely. And then justify it, you know, like my mom with the trash. Well, trash is fair game, really. You know, like the condom box that I threw away. Oh, you had to save that for the recycling and pull it out and put it on the table so I can see it when I came downstairs, and the whole family would stare at the condom box. Thanks. You know, that's not okay. That's a person who enjoys doing that kind of thing. They get pleasure out of making you uncomfortable, you know, because that's not really like pain. I wouldn't say that that's painful, but that's uncomfortable. You know, it's like it's an abuse of your privacy, and it's not right. You have the right to have your boundaries. Another person says, oh, geez, my mother always barged into the bathroom with me, found a Kotex in the trash once and was waving it around the kitchen when I got home with questions. Medicine stain from yeast infection management. I was a smartass. I asked her if she wanted me to drop my drawers and bend over so she could just climb on in. One of many what the fuck looks I got from my mom. She is deceased now. She was hysterically crying. Yeah. No privacy for the boundaries, and especially the most private things like sex, underwear, finances. This is what I find, you know, and it's incredible. No boundaries whatsoever. The other person says, yes, what on earth? I moved out when I was a sophomore because my mom was so ridiculous. My mom would talk to her sisters about all this too. Yeah, so that's the gossiping element, you know, the gossiping element of the narcissist. And this is mostly the women. Men will do this too, but mostly the women, oh God, they'll just sit on the phone or they'll meet with their catty friends and they'll just gossip, talking about everybody's private stuff like that. It's nothing to do with them. Nothing whatsoever. That's your private life. That's like the most private things of your body, of your life. Absolutely not. That's extremely toxic. It's so painful when that's coming from like your mother, you know, like the one person or one of the main people in your life who are supposed to really have your back. You know, like you probably, if you have a Facebook, you probably see like on Mother's Day and stuff, and maybe throughout the year, like some of your friends who have healthy mothers, and they talk about all the awesome things they do with their mothers. And you're like, what's that like? Like, I really wonder what that would be like to be able to have that kind of connection, you know, that kind of trust, that kind of, you know, someone is there, like they have your back, not that they're going to betray you and talk about your most private stuff to other people. Someone else said, oh my God, my mom had those long, loud conversations with her sisters too. Yeah, it could be sisters, it could be other relatives, it could be friends, it could be neighbors. You know, it's meant to shame you, you know, if you find out about it, if you're there, like worst yet, if you're nearby and you hear them doing it, that's meant to shame you. But when they're doing it and they think that you don't recognize it, they're just getting like narcissistic supply off of it. I made a video about that. If you haven't seen it, check that out. My mom, I think you mean, would rat my behavior out to them, and then they would help shame me too. Yeah, those are the flying monkeys. That's the smear campaign and the flying monkeys. And that's really painful, is when everybody, it's like gang, ganging up on you, and gang harassment and gang abuse like that. It's so embarrassing. Someone else said, yeah, everyone got to form their opinions on me before I could even become the woman I am now. Right. The narcissist loves to do the impression management. They do it for their own, their own image, how they want other people to see them. They're a monster at home, but then they go out and then they look like this exemplary figure. And everybody thinks they're wonderful, and they manage the impressions, and they get everyone to think just so about who they are, about their life, about how much money they have, and that sort of thing. But they'll also impression manage you. Like if you're her daughter, the daughter of the narcissist mother is usually the one who has it the worst, because she's got a lot of jealousy, and anything that you have that she doesn't, whether it's your looks, your intelligence, your ability to work and have successful results, anything, they will be jealous of, and they will use to exploit you, and using that gossip like that is just another way to do that. It's very hurtful. And, I'm sorry to all of you who went through that as kids, especially because it's very scarring on your personality, on your sense of self. That's where the worthlessness, the low self-esteem, because you start to believe that that's real. If all these people are projecting this image onto you of who you are or who you're supposed to be, you start to believe it, after a while, and you lose sense of who you really are, and you have to totally redefine yourself moving forward. Someone says, it happens all the time in my family, the flying monkey gossip crap, and they get mad at me when I don't join in. I tell them to knock it off. I have spent less and less time with them. It's sad because they are family that I love, but I don't love that at all. Yeah, you don't want to be around that, because that's really destructive to your sense of self-esteem, to your sense of self-worth. And, at a certain point, it becomes masochistic, to stay around that, because inevitably it's going to make you feel crappy about yourself. Even if you know what it is, and going in there what to expect, and predictably this is going to happen and then that's going to happen, it's still devastating, because later it's still going to go through your mind a bit. Those words are going to go through your mind. You're probably going to look in the mirror and question it from time to time. Or maybe you're at work and you're doing something, and suddenly you're questioning your ability to do something because of something that they were telling you. And that group mentality where there's a gang of them ganging up against you. That's where it gets really confusing. You really start to doubt yourself, because you're one person and they're all these people, and they know that, and they prey on that. Someone says, had an aunt chew me out as an adult for not coming home from my mother's surgery, which I had just learned about 15 minutes earlier. And my mom told me it was totally fine. Guess she called her big sister to boo-hoo. I handled civilly but firmly. Still rattled me though. Yeah. Minor sinus surgery, FYI. Surgery was next day. Yeah, they love to do that kind of stuff. They're weird about their health. The ones who play the victim are the ones that are always telling you about their health problems, and poor me, and everybody have pity for me. And they're always getting people to pity them. And then when anybody else is sick or gets cancer or dies, they're the ones that are like wailing over everyone else. Oh my God, it's just so horrible, and so and so, and oh my God, it's just so horrible. And like they're the ones at the funeral doing that. And it's like, have you no respect for the dead? That they have to use that experience to gain narcissistic supply. And then there are other ones who are extremely private of their health. They're probably the ones that are going through your health stuff, you know, and confronting you on your health stuff, but they don't tell you about their health stuff. They hide that very secretly. But then they'll do stuff like this where, like, you know, they'll be like, oh, it's no big deal, you know, don't come for it, don't do anything. And then they'll go and they'll tell everybody else that it's like a really big deal. And then they're like, so your daughter's not coming or your son's not coming. And then they're like, yeah, you know, and then they make you out to be like a bad person when, like, maybe you even asked if you should go or something of this nature, or they specifically told you don't come. It's not a big deal. Someone says, haha, oh my God, yes, the drama. They have to draw attention when it's not even about them. Yeah. Yeah, you can always pick out the narcissist at the funerals. You can pick out the narcissist, you know, when someone gets cancer or some kind of, you know, in a car accident or something like that. They pervert those situations, you know, they make it all about them. They want to talk about, you know, how everything they did for that person and how much they helped that person. That's gross. That's really gross. Like, it almost makes me just want to like vomit when I see that. That's a big sign of a narcissist. My ex's mom was wailing so loudly at her mom's funeral, and that was so weird. She always talked about how much she hated her mom. Yeah. Yeah, but that was the public, you know, the public perception and the impression management. They got to look like they cared so much. They got to look like they helped so much. You know, they were so important in that person's life, and that person was so important to them, but probably didn't really care that much. You know, it was more about the supply they got by being in public, you know, and had everyone's eyes on them like that. Yeah. Let me see if I missed anything here. Yeah. What else do you guys have? Any other questions? Always. I think some more people have joined us. In fact, I think I might see a new person. Welcome. Feel free to write something in the chat. Hopefully you see the little chat icon. If you would like to use your voice, if you have headphones or a speaker and you would like to use your voice to ask a question or say something, you're welcome to do so. Please just keep in mind that your voice will be in the YouTube recording because I post these on YouTube afterward. So if you want to be totally, totally anonymous, you can write in the chat here. I'm not going to read your name out loud. No one will know who you are. So you can feel free to ask whatever you need to. Okay. Someone says, there are some people in my life that I would like to tell them what I went through, but I don't know how to. Yeah. So this is a tough situation. You know, you want to be cautious, you know, to make sure that these are not toxic people. Make sure these are not people who are going to use that information against you. Excuse me, first of all. Second of all, people who haven't been through it can't conceive of it. Like, can't conceive of the kind of mind fuckery that is this kind of abuse, because it's so out there. And if you hadn't been through it, it just doesn't make any sense. And they could look at you like something's wrong with you. They might think that you're crazy or paranoid or something else. And that could further set you back in your healing process. If you start to doubt yourself and you start to like second guess and you start to believe that you're crazy again, because the abusive person probably led you on to believe that you were crazy. So I would always approach that with caution, you know, and that's the crux, because you want to be able to share this with the people who are close to you in your life, because like you want to have an intimate connection with them. You want them to know what happened to you. You want to be able to share, you know, your pain and your struggles with people. You want to get some feedback maybe, or maybe you just want to vent it and just talk about it with somebody because you feel so alone. This is the benefit of the support groups, like the support groups of people who have been through narcissistic abuse, because they get it. they've been there. And even though they were with a different person and it was a different situation, it's almost exactly the same patterns, and the effects on the victim are almost exactly identical. They will get it through and through. Like, you can say this much and they understand this much. You know, the people in your life who haven't been through it, or you meet a new person, you know, you start dating a new person and maybe that person has never been through it, and you slowly introduce the idea to them, you know, very slowly. I would recommend when you're dating someone, because the last thing you want to do is just like blurt it all out, and then they look at you like you're like some kind of drama queen, Looney Tunes, and they hit the road, don't even give you a chance, you know. And like, that's not even how you identify yourself, and it's not where you're at now, but it's what happened before. So be very cautious with that. Now, if you are talking about friends you trust or other family members that you really, really trust, they're not toxic, they're healthy people, they just haven't gone through it, you know, introduce them through little things at first, you know. So there's this thing called narcissistic abuse. Have you ever heard of it? Do you know what a narcissist is? Have you ever heard that term? And like, I would start to like softly introduce it like that. And I would ask some questions too, like that, to see where they're at. You know, some people have heard of it. Like, you would be surprised nowadays how many people have heard something about it. Either they saw an article online or something went through their Facebook news feed or their Twitter feed, you know, and maybe they don't entirely get it, but they're like, yeah, you know, I think I heard about that. Or, you know, I work with this lady who told me she's just divorcing a psychopath. Or, you know, I know this guy at the gym and like, he told me that his wife is a borderline, or like whatever, you know, maybe they have some kind of background. And so the way memory works is based on association. If you have already associated something with some new information, you're much more likely to remember it and to understand it. So if they've had some other association with narcissistic abuse or a narcissist or a borderline or a psychopath, then asking them a question and kind of like, you know, bringing back up that thing they remembered from the past, now they have like a foundation to stand on. Now you're not out there in left field on your own. They know other people who have been through it, or they saw something online and like, yeah, okay, they're kind of familiar with it. If they know 000 about it, I would probably, you know, recommend something online that they check out, like, you know, your favorite video or something, or your favorite website, you know, maybe the psychopath free website, or maybe your favorite book. If your friend or your, you know, whomever is really into reading, they're an avid reader, maybe you give them the book Psychopath Free, which is a really easy read and it's a quick read, and it really explains the dynamics of these relationships. And, you know, maybe you let them read the book and you're like, I really want to talk to you about what happened. I feel like if, you know, if you had a chance to read this book, you would really understand it. Someone who really loves you and is really interested, you know, in what's going on and everything, they will do that. They will read that book and, you know, and try to understand what's going on. If people start to blame you, you know, or try to convince you that you're crazy or something's wrong or blah, 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 I wouldn't go any further. I wouldn't try to convince them, because then you're getting into the territory of like when you're trying to convince the smear campaign, you know, you're trying to convince the flying monkeys or whomever else overheard the smear campaign. You're trying to convince them that, you know, you're not the abuser here. You didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't your fault. You're not crazy. You know, then you end up looking like the bad guy and they end up using that against you, or you end up looking like you're crazy. So be a little cautious about that. Oh, she says, yeah, the new guy I went on a date with was a psych major. So we got to talking about psychopaths. I had to hold back on my story because I didn't want to overwhelm him with my situation. Although I wish I could have shared. I didn't want to scare him away. Good job. Good job. And that's awesome that he was a psych major. So he already has a little bit of a foundation, maybe not a lot, but at least a little bit of a foundation, probably at least one class on the cluster B personality disorders, something to start with. And good job not, you know, just word vomiting it all out, you know, on selective sharing and sharing little bits at a time. And down the road, when you have more confidence, you know, if you see each other long-term, down the road, you can share bits more of the pieces. But good job. Yeah. It's funny how a lot of psych majors don't really know about narc abuse. Yeah, I've talked to a bunch of them about this too. And they told me, I've even talked to MDs who took like one psychiatric, unit or something, in their training. And they said there was only a tiny bit on the cluster B personality disorders. They learned that the borderline personality disorder was like the worst one in the whole DSM. And that's about it. That's about all they remember. And they don't really know much about narcissistic abuse. And, that is one of the dangers of people seeking therapy from therapists who don't know what it is, because maybe the therapist is a healthy person and has never gone through it and just doesn't get it and just keeps getting the victim to fixate, on what's wrong with them and not focusing at all on what happened, like why they are feeling the way they are, versus like, actually addressing what happened. Or worst case scenario, which is also the case a lot of times, is a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists are narcissists. And that's even worse, because then, then you're in deep in the same kind of dynamic that you were in that relationship with. And the worst part is that you're looking at this person as like an authority figure or like a leader, or a healer, and can get really twisted up and confused. So do be cautious about that. Just because someone has a degree in psych or is licensed as a psychotherapist does not mean that they really understand, what the cluster B personality disorder spectrum is like, what narcissistic abuse, psychopathic abuse, borderline abuse is like, what the effects are on the victims. This person says, my father is a psychiatrist and I think he finds a lot of my claims about my ex-narc incredulous. Yeah. See, that's a shame. Went to couples therapy and the therapist wanted us both to talk about our faults. My narc later used that against me. Of course, he hardly mentioned what he was doing wrong. Yeah, this is why, Dr. Simon mentioned this, and a lot of people, a lot of experts mention this. I think Ross Rosenberg has mentioned it too, where narcissists, what they'll do is sometimes the worst thing you can do is take one of these people to therapy, like to couples counseling, because they will snow over the professional. They will lead that professional on to believe that you're the problem, that you're wrong, that they're amazing and everything's fine. And then you end up needing therapy for the therapy and it goes really bad. So, that's one of the major dangers of taking them to therapy. I wouldn't recommend it at all. I know it seems so counterintuitive to like the regular ways that we deal with people. But the thing is that the regular rules of human interaction do not apply to these people. Dr. Simon says traditional psychotherapy does not apply to these people. Traditional psychotherapy helps neurotics, people who have anxiety, depression, those of us who were the victims. We develop neuroses because of that abuse, because we have been inhibited, because we have, an enormous sense of anxiety from the trauma. Traditional psychotherapy does not apply to people who have character disturbances, to manipulative, the covert, aggressive, manipulative personalities. It's not going to be effective with them. I think I missed a couple things. Let me just run back here. Okay, this person says, my dramatic, mean mom lived with us for 16 years until dementia required we put her in nursing home. I still feel rattled and bruised from those years. Wow, 16 years. Mom was mentally incompetent to live on her own. She had a long, slow slide into dementia, but I still wish I hadn't put my kids and husband through her issues, which pre-existed dementia. Now, you bring up this really interesting concept, and I would like to see a lot of research on this. My suspicion is that sometimes dementia is related to narcissism, to the delusions that these people live with. And when they're younger and they have the facility, to control their inner delusions better, to manage the impressions outwardly and control the inner delusions, they don't really give it away to most people. Only those that are closest that receive the abuse experience it. And then later, as they grow old, they lose the faculty to control that as much. And then it becomes really obvious that they're living in a total delusional reality. This is my suspicion. This is not science. It's not scientific at all. I've never seen anyone else make that connection. I don't know if it's real. It's just my suspicion. And this is because one of the, this business partner that I had last year, who now I recognize as like a sociopath. At first, I thought he just had dementia, you know, and his mom had dementia. And I thought that's what it was. I thought he was getting like an early onset. And because I couldn't explain, it was the gaslighting, but I couldn't explain how we could have this conversation and I could say this thing 3 times and then be like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And we're right here. And he says no. And so I don't do that thing because he tells me no. And then 2 days later, he acts like I should have just done that thing, you know, and like, it'll just drive you mad. And I didn't realize that he was abusing me like a sociopath. I thought he was getting early onset dementia. So I think it could be really confusing between the two. Mom told me she has always had a great butt. There you go, right? That's awesome. That's awesome. I do think there might be some connection. I don't think it's across the board. I don't think it's always that dementia, you know, is the result of that. But, you know, it would make sense that if all your life you're living a delusion and you're pretending that you're living in this imaginary world, that you're creating some kind of effect in your brain, right? And so, you know, you're deleting other information, you're deleting perceptions of reality that are coming in, you're deleting all that information. Something has to be happening in the hardware. It has to be corrupting the hard drive. You know, and so like dementia, Alzheimer's, I think predominantly where they can do the brain scans and see holes in the brain, you know, and maybe some of that's caused by physical things in the environment. Maybe some of that is caused by, you know, the delusions that a person is living all their life. It seemed like my husband could be very loving and kind at times. Then at other times, he would flip into his hurtful, dismissive, distant gaslighting behavior. He especially got bad if he felt that he was being criticized or I was trying to share my feelings with him. I think as long as I was happy and offering supply, he was fine. If I rocked the boat, hell would break loose. Yeah. Yeah. That's why some people end up enabling this where they will appease the person. A lot of children will learn this strategy with a narcissistic parent. They'll appease the parent instead of standing up for their rights, instead of standing up for their boundaries. Yeah, I learned to shut up, this person says. Yeah, because you learn that it's just the easy way out. It's like hitting the easy button, you know, versus having the confrontation and then all hell breaks out. And then it's like, it's either, you know, the silent treatment or the attacks. It could be, you know, aggressive and overt. It could be covert, you know, behind the scenes, like that subtle degradation, you know, and, you know, like you said, it's sometimes he appeared to be very loving and kind, and then he would flip. That's also that abuse cycle. Like the cycle is characterized by the flip between idealization, everything's fine, you're wonderful, I love you, blah, 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 and devaluation, you're horrible, you're the worst thing that's ever happened, it must be horrible, you know, to be your partner, and I don't know why I put up with you, and no one else will ever put up with you, and like, you're just the ugliest thing that ever walked this earth, you know, and it goes back and forth, and that's the whole cycle. And, you know, the thing is, like, sometimes we want to be like, well, this person is just this part over here, but people aren't just one part, it's the whole thing, it's a whole cycle. It's not, oh, you know, he's a nice guy sometime, or she's a nice person sometime, and then sometimes, you know, he's just a jerk, and sometimes she's just like a total asshole. No, that's the whole picture. That's who they are, you know, because if aggressive, abusive people were always, you know, aggressive outwardly and abusive, no one would ever hang out with them. They would never get anything from people, you know, other than bullying, that sort of thing. But, you know, if they want to get the sort of long-term kind of supply, you bet they cultivate that, you know, that image that they want you to believe, you know, of who they are. And that's how they hook you in. That's how they fool everybody at work, you know, and that's how they move up the ladder at work into these high positions. They fool everybody, you know, into believing that they're an exemplary character in society, but they're not. That's just part of the abuse cycle. They know they have to do that to confuse people, you know, to get them to second doubt, to give them the benefit of the doubt. And yeah, that's like you mentioned, the dismissive, distant, gaslighting behavior. Yeah, dismissive, you mentioned if you wanted to share your feelings with him. How many of you ever did that, right? You tried to share your feelings. Like, you're always there supporting the narcissist. And then the very few times that you have an emotional need to express, and usually it has to do with something they did or didn't do, right? And you want to talk it up, you know, you want to talk about your feelings and bring it up, and they completely dismiss it. Like, they will either shut it right down right there, or sometimes they'll literally stand up and walk out of the room and then give you the silent treatment. Stonewalling, they call it, where they just shut it down, you know, like politician does. When they don't want to answer the question, they just shut it right down. Maybe they'll talk about something else. Maybe they'll walk away, but they avoid it entirely. Yeah, can't share my feelings. I'm too annoying. Yeah, sometimes they tell you you're too needy. You know, maybe like one time every like 6 months or 3 or 4 months, you bring up something that you want to talk about, because it's always about them. You're always supporting them. But as soon as you need something, now you're needy, especially if it has to do with them. He actually told me, you're bothering me. You're annoying. Go away. It really hurt. Yeah. Yeah, it hurts, because you're like, this isn't a normal human relationship. Like, in a normal human relationship, you should be able to talk about your feelings. I should be able to talk about my feelings, whether it's about something unrelated to you and me, like your work and my day, or we're talking about our kids, or we're talking about plans that we're making, or we're talking about an argument or an impasse or a difficulty that we had together. We should be able to talk about it and work it out. We should be able to talk like emotionally mature adults and say, you know, baby, I really love you. And when you do this thing, I feel really hurt, right? That's really an emotionally mature, self-responsible way to approach that. That's not, you're not even saying, you hurt me, and throwing the blame. You're saying, I feel hurt when this happens. You know, when you do this, when you say this, I feel hurt. So I'm owning the responsibility of saying, I feel hurt. I didn't say you made me. I didn't say you this. I said, I feel. And if a person can't meet you halfway, when you're owning your shit halfway, they're not meeting you halfway in that relationship. That's not a 50-50. You know, that's probably like a 90-10, maybe a 70-30, but that's not, you know, that's not a reciprocal relationship. That's not a normal, healthy relationship. Someone says, my narc would use stonewalling and silent treatment for very extensive periods of time, days, weeks, etc. Yeah, this is really characteristic of the cluster Bs. They love the silent treatment. And unfortunately, a lot of victims don't recognize this as an abuse tactic. One of my friends would be like, oh, you know, my wife, you know, she'll just shut it down and not talk to me for, you know, days or weeks at a time. You know, her family is, you know, Eastern European, you know, and we Mediterranean people, you know, we're fiery blood, and we yell and we talk things out and we work it out. We might get really angry and have a big argument, but we work it out and we end up making love and making up, where, you know, the Eastern Europeans just stop talking. And it's like, that's not, it's not a cultural thing necessarily. Like, that is an abuse tactic that people use. And they don't have to be from a certain culture. It doesn't mean that everybody from Eastern Europe doesn't talk things out. That's, and then, you know, and then you, like, they would say things like, you know, they don't talk about it. They write letters to each other. That's not healthy. There's nothing healthy about that. And rationalizing that, excuse making for that, that's not healthy either. You know, you got to recognize that's abuse. They do that purposely. When they don't want to talk about something, when you bring it up and you're like, you know, this thing that you did and I was really hurt, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with your feelings. They don't want to deal with the responsibility of their actions. So they'll just shut it down, and they'll shut it down with that silent treatment. And then, you know, it's almost like they're forcing you to get to that point. And the only way to break the silent treatment is for you to be like, all right, I'll take the blame again, right? And then you're back in the same thing. And it just keeps happening. That's a very telltale sign of one of these cluster B personality disorders. Someone says, I would be so calm about it. I would use I statements and he would shut me out. Yeah, so the I statements are the self-responsible way to enter that discussion. That's you owning your feelings, because no one makes you feel, right? We all feel. however we choose to feel. It doesn't mean that what that person is doing is okay, right? But, you know, you're allowed to have the reaction that you have to that. You're allowed to feel how you feel, as long as you understand that you feel, right? And that you own, I feel this way, right? And when you approach it that way, from that healthy, mature, emotional space, if that person is still gaslighting you or dismissing it or stonewalling, silent treatment, you know, that's not healthy. It's not healthy at all. My husband loved it when I had an orgasm and said it made him feel like a man. When I cried on his lap when my mother was dying, he also said that made him feel like a man. This always made me feel weird. Just shows the intense insecurity they have inside. Yeah. I'm almost kind of surprised that he liked the fact that he could comfort you during that. Because a lot of times the interaction with the narcissist, so your mom dies or, you know, is dying, and it's really traumatic for you and sad. Oftentimes what they do is like, well, that's not important to me. It's no big deal. Or they're like, well, when my so-and-so was dying, this and that, you know, as if like you don't have the right to have feelings and stuff. That often happens to other people. But it sounds like he was getting some kind of supply from that. I don't know why. I don't know him personally. I don't know why, but that's interesting. Someone else said, the narc would say the only way to break the silent treatment was to agree to horrific sexual abuse, demanding really, really weird shit to earn being treated humanely. Wow, that's sick. That's really sick. I'm assuming you're a man by your name. Would you mind telling me if you're a man or woman? I'm just curious. Usually the male narcissist will do this to the woman, where, you know, they force her into having sex. It's like a sexual abuse, you know, to get what he wants. Though it does happen, men from women to men as well, where the woman, you know, extorts the sexual interaction from the man. Oh, you're a woman. I'm so sorry. This was my husband of 20 years. Okay. It does happen to men too. I have definitely heard men say that they felt like the woman was like emotionally blackmailing, extorting them. They had to perform. They had to do this thing. And maybe it was some like really sick, you know, sort of BDSM kind of thing. And if they didn't do it, they didn't love them enough, you know, or whatever. But it works both ways. Yeah, it happens in marriages. Yep, BDSM. Yeah, this happens in marriages. I mean, this is what they call marital rape. You know, when a husband, you know, forces himself on the wife and forces her to do her wifely duty, you know, and a lot of men that I've heard from too said that they felt almost like sexually violated, you know, they've even used the word raped, you know, by a woman because of how aggressive she was with him sexually, and how like humiliating and emasculating she was with him, to like force him to do these things, or he wasn't man enough, you know, or he wasn't good enough, or whatever. It definitely works both ways. And it even happens in marriages, you know, and that's the really sick thing, where it's like, it's not just like you just met this person, you just started dating, and like, whoa, the whips and chains come out and stuff. And you're like, okay, thanks, but no thanks. Like, you've been married for decades and this person is doing this. That can happen so often. Okay, someone said, oh, to the earlier comment, I'm surprised by the comforting too. My narc was so fake about comforting me. I felt like I was hugging a rock. Yeah, you know, when it just feels empty, cold and empty, like there's no real empathy or connection or feeling for what you're going through. That was the only way the silent treatment would go away, if I would give him sexual favors. Sometimes I would hate him so much, but perform the sexual acts so we could be on good terms again. Yeah. So many people say that exact same thing. You know, there was something they had to do. It could be sex. It could be something else, that they had to do this thing in order for the person to stop ignoring them, to stop giving them the silent treatment. That's called blackmail. Blackmail. That is a very aggressive, manipulative tactic. It's not healthy. It's not normal. You know, for all of those of us who have been through this, it's really important to get that through your head, to get that in really good, so that you never, ever, ever put up with that again. That is not okay. It doesn't matter how long you've been married. That's not healthy. When one person blackmails the other person to do something that they don't want to do. I mean, like, to violate your body like that, especially, like, take out the trash is one thing, you know, I mean, it could still be manipulative, but taking out the trash is one thing. We're talking about violating your body. That's a whole other level. And that is not okay. And you have every right to say no. You have every right to, like, own the decisions that you make with your body, to decide, you know, what you will willingly or not willingly enter into. And, you know, you have a right to say no, and don't put up with that. You don't have to do that. And, you know, if a person is not going to talk to you unless you fuck them, unless you give them whatever they want with BDSM, it's not a person to be with. You should leave that person. You should start making a plan. You know, if anybody's listening to this and they're still in it, you know, start making a plan and get out and sneak out. You know, because that's not going to change. That's that person's behavior. That's how they are. They have learned. That's how they manipulate. They will continue, and it will escalate. I just made a video about that recently. Check that out if you haven't. It will escalate. And these sexual things, that will always escalate. If you've ever gotten involved with someone who was, like, kind of sort of into BDSM, what you find out over the long term is that they're not kind of sort of into it. They're, like, really into it. And, like, it gets more and more and more intense because the tolerance builds. You know, sometimes they only show you a little bit about who they are at the beginning. Sometimes they flat out tell you who they are. Typically in the case of psychopaths, they'll tell you, like, a lot of things. But what will happen is that sexual stuff will increase because their tolerance is going up. Their need for thrill, their need for, like, excitement, their need to dominate you, to control you, like, fully, it's growing. You know, that desire is growing. And so what they're going to do is going to exacerbate. And so you want to get out of there as soon as possible. My ex-narc is very sadistic, loves the suffering the narcissistic abuse causes. Yeah. Sometimes that sadism just plays out emotionally, and sometimes it gets sexualized. It gets played out sexually through BDSM. And BDSM is a sexualization of the power and control issue. I don't think it's healthy. You know, I got pulled into that for a little while too. And what I realized was that was me looking at that sexual issue. You know, I was agreeing to it because part of me was trying to understand it, the sexual abuse from the past, the power control issues, you know, that had always been following me through my life. And then I finally realized that was just unhealthy. Like, it's just not healthy. It will destroy you. You know, even if you enter into that, which is what I did with the last person, you know, I'd entered into that thinking we loved each other so much, and that, you know, we could use this in a healthy way, and that, you know, it could still be a healthy thing. I was deluding myself into believing that. And then I realized that it would destroy us. It would destroy him. It would destroy me. It would destroy our relationship. It will eventually destroy everything because it goes out of hand. You know, it's like playing with fire. Fire can be a really positive, beautiful thing. You can cook food. You can heat your house. You know, you can make light. But, you know, when a fire goes uncontrolled, it destroys everything. Someone said, I thought it was odd. The last time my narc and I got back together, he wanted to go to a sex store and buy all sorts of toys. He wanted to make me happy, but never asked me if I wanted all these toys. I didn't, but he bought them anyway and made me use them, or else he would not talk to me. Yeah, that's a form of sexual abuse. You know, even if you go along with it because you feel blackmailed into it, that's still a form of sexual abuse. You know, again, any of you who are listening to this who are still in it, or if in the future you should start dating someone and the toys like this come out, and I don't just mean like a vibrator, like, you know, that could be a benevolent thing, but, you know, when the weird stuff starts coming out, and the domination and the punishment, and, you know, removing your sense of control and giving someone your entire control over you, that's where things start to get really spooky. That's where you want to be very careful. And the bottom line is your gut feeling. If you look at that stuff, or you listen to him or her, you know, trying to entice you into doing this thing, and you just get this icky feeling like, I don't want anything to do with that, don't say yes. Don't agree to that. You have every right to say no. This is your boundary. This is the boundary thing. This is about holding that boundary, setting that boundary, enforcing that boundary, and saying, it's not for me. I don't want that. I don't need that in my life. and they might be like, oh, you're just so close-minded. Oh, you're just so vanilla. You're just so boring, aren't you? Yes. Yes, I am. So why don't you go on and find yourself a more interesting lover, whatever, but just let them go. Let that person go. Do not try to convince them that they don't need that. Do not try to convince them that you together, you don't need this, for your love or whatever. None of that's going to work. The person is into that stuff. Let them go. Let them go work out their issues. Someone else says here, the truly scary part is that your psyche has been groomed and managed down so much that a sadistic sexual deviant can convince you that they have a right for you to be completely controlled by them. The sexual abuse started after our children were born. We had been together for 10 years by that point. Wow. That must have felt like being hit blindsided. Chances are he was suppressing that for years. Chances are, I'm sorry, but chances are he was possibly doing that with other people without you knowing, and then tried to bring you into that. Chances are he was watching porn of that nature without you knowing. It seems almost inconceivable that all of a sudden, he would develop an interest in this. Maybe. But chances are that was something from the past. And yeah, you mentioned the grooming, where they will groom you. And this could happen in a new relationship. This can happen in a long-term relationship. Like, you were with this person 10 years and they were slowly grooming you, or like all of a sudden they decided to like groom you into this part, and manage down your feelings, manage down your concerns, your, no, thank you. I don't want to do this. Your what's what I'm looking for? Your hesitations, your reservations, they'll manage that down. They'll minimize things. They'll assure you that everything's just fine and it's loving and consensual and you can have a safe word and all you have to do is say this word and we'll just stop. And they don't stop sometimes. And that was my experience, where you say stop and they go harder. And that is when you absolutely need to put your foot down and walk away. Like, you cannot trust a person like that. And one time is all it has to take. And afterwards, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe they even laugh at it, worse yet. But don't ever go back for more, because they weren't sorry. And that wasn't just one time. It's going to get worse. They're going to keep doing it. They meant to do it. They definitely wanted to do it. And it's not a good situation. If that's not what you want, you have the right to say no. Let's see here. So glad you were telling me this. I really didn't realize it. I just knew it wasn't something I wasn't okay with. The gut didn't like it. That is your 100% barometer. When your gut doesn't like it, that's it. Stop right there. Stop trying to convince yourself that, oh, everybody's doing it nowadays and, it's in vogue and, 50 Shades of Grey, everybody liked that. That was just a glorification of abuse, and that's danger when you glorify abuse in a culture. And you have every right to say no. There's nothing wrong with you for saying no. Absolutely nothing wrong. You don't have to feel any sort of peer pressure to do anything like that, because that's all that is. It's a form of peer pressure. When your gut says no, you say no. Listen to your gut. Don't try to convince yourself that you need to be more open-minded and more adventurous sexually. If you don't want to go there, don't go there. You don't have to go there. Let's see. I think you are right about it being under the surface. The disregard for me was evident from the beginning. Now I look back with the rose-colored glasses off. Yeah. That's the thing, is like early on, we all had those rose-colored glasses. We saw what we wanted to see. We believed what we wanted to believe. And we didn't notice that the person was painting themselves. And that's the thing, is like, people will always reveal themselves. People will always paint themselves if we allow them to. If we just allow them to reveal themselves versus seeing what we want to see, believing what we want to believe, superimposing that on top of them, that's where we go wrong. That's where we get hooked in there. And that's where we realize we're in a total illusion, because everything that person was doing was an illusion, and everything we imagined was an illusion. And what really is not pretty at all. In fact, it's really, really ugly when it shows its face. And, oftentimes these sorts of things really hide under the surface. Lots of times in marriages, people will talk about, all of a sudden they realized after 10 years and they think that all of a sudden the person changed. But I would encourage them to look deeper. You know, maybe something life-changing happened and the person changed in that moment, but chances are, you know, these kinds of patterns were there a long time. Chances are they were either, you know, repressing it with you and or working that out with someone else behind your back. You know, whether it was porn, whether it was, you know, hiring someone to do that for them, or whether it was just finding an affair, someone to have an affair with who was willing. Someone said, yeah, he did that. He would do something and I would say, whoa, I told you no. And he would go, oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I caught that late. You're probably talking about how when you said no and then he pushed it more and did just the opposite. Yeah. And then he would say, oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. But it was too late by that point because it already happened. You know, if you're dating someone and you're like, you know, things are getting hot and you're heating things up and, you know, maybe you both intend to have sex and your intention is for him to wear a condom, or if you're a guy, for you to wear the condom. You know, if you tell him like, okay, hold on a second, let me get the condom. And he's like, no, and shoves it in, definitely walk away from that person. Get away immediately. That is an immediate red flag. Do not stay with that person. Do not think it was a one-time thing. Trust that that person does that with everyone. And you're putting yourself at risk by staying with that person. She says, I mean, we were together for years and I couldn't believe he still tried. He knew better. Yeah. Yeah. You would think after years he would have a different kind of respect, you know, for you, but they don't have respect like that. Again, no boundaries, no respect for your boundaries. And that's why he did that. You know, he felt entitled to abuse your boundary. He probably assumed that you would compromise your boundary and let him have it and let him do what he wanted to please him, or just to end the silent treatment. I think you were the one who mentioned it was the silent treatment, blackmail. Yeah. Sex is not a currency for blackmail. Sex is not, you know, a manipulation, a leverage to get, you know, to get the person, you know, force a person to have sex with them, you know, in order to be able to have a normal relationship and talk about things. That's not normal. That's not healthy at all. Someone says they use sexual abuse to dehumanize, disempower, eliminate your sovereignty. Exactly. Because there's always an objectification with this kind of abuse. And so they dehumanize you, right? They make you an object, a thing, a disposable thing. And that disempowers you, that takes away your power, that makes them able to dominate you and control you and eliminate your sovereignty. As you said, you know, you as a sovereign being have no right to your boundaries, you know, to your space, to your desires of what you want to do and what you don't want to do, and what you want to allow someone to do with your body and not, whether he's your husband or wife or some new person that you're dating. It's not okay. You know, I want to mention this again. I don't think there's any guys here right now, but I just want to put this out there for any guys who are listening to this later. You know, same thing applies to you guys. Like, you don't have to give in to an aggressive, demanding woman who forces you to do things against your will that you don't want to do, just because you feel like you need to please her, or you feel like you owe her that, just because you're her husband or you're her boyfriend or you're dating her and you're trying to win her approval over. Walk away from that. Walk away. That's only going to get worse. What else? Any other questions you guys have? You know, one of the more damaging things along this lines of the sexual blackmail and the sexual abuse is the next day when they're rationalizing how everything was okay, and they get you to get to that point where you agree with them. You know, they minimize it and you agree that it was okay. And then you go on like everything's okay. And that is just really destructive to your body, but to your psychology, to your spirit, you know, holistically, body, mind, spirit. That is really destructive, you know, and then it becomes a slippery slope. You know, you start to believe that's that, you know, that it wasn't a big deal, and you're blowing it out of proportion, and you're not so open-minded. And, you know, other women would do this for their husband, or other men would do this for the woman who's interested in them. It's not. It's very dangerous. This is a taboo topic in dinner party circles. Yeah, it is probably. I don't know. I don't really participate in a lot of that. And I probably say some things that are taboo or considered inappropriate. I like to talk about the real things. I like to talk about real issues. I like to talk about real life situations and stuff. I like to talk with people who can be real. You know, I don't want to just talk about surface bullshit when I'm with my friends and other people. Like, I want to talk about real stuff. Like, this is the stuff that, like, you know, that we're all thinking, and who do we talk to about it? You know, and if you're not talking to anybody, how are you going to work that out? If you don't talk to somebody, if you don't get some feedback, if you don't hear some other perspectives or get online and read some stuff, you know, like this person says, it's hard to speak out. It is. You have to know to understand. Yeah. Someone else says, it's important. I'd rather discuss the real issues than pretend they haven't bothered me. Yeah, because this is devastating. It's devastating to your sense of sexuality. It's devastating to your psyche. It's devastating to your spirit. It's devastating, you know, to your mental state and how you show up every day. Your self-definition. Yeah. Like you said, with the right people, of course, definitely. Yeah. You don't want to share really private, deep information with narcissists because they will use that against you. They will definitely manipulate that information against you. Definitely don't get involved in any conversations. If a narcissist is trying to like get you to tell them like all about your past sexual experiences and how many people you've been with and this and that, and they're really grilling you about this stuff, that's a trap. Watch out. Don't give them that information. They'll use it against you. They use everything that you say against you. They'll shame you. They'll like slut shame you. They call it slut shaming. It particularly happens to women more than men because of the double standard in society, the bias where men are allowed to sleep around and women are not. And so they'll shame you, you know, for whatever, you know, they have their own criterion that they're judging you about, you know, how many partners you had or whatever you tried sexually or whatever. And don't give in to that. Don't let someone sex shame you like that. Absolutely not. Don't share that information with narcissists. Have any of you, someone asked, have any of you had a partner stop initiating sex with you? Feel so manipulative? Definitely. Yeah, that's part of the control. Sex with a cluster B personality disorder is about control. It's not about sex. It's about control. Just like sexual abuse is about power and control. It's not really about the sex. Someone else said, oh yeah, he wanted to know how many partners, what we did, etc. Why? That's him extracting information to use against you in the future, to call you a whore, to call you a slut, to tell you, why didn't you do that for me? You did it for so-and-so or whatever. That's a trap. It's always a trap. Or to tell you, you had all these partners. Oh, you're just dirty, that sort of thing. Walk away from those people. Someone else says, he keeps saying it's his insecurity for weight he gained, maybe part of it, but I have begged but stopped begging, have been drumming my fingers for so long now. I'm sorry. This happens to men and women in abusive relationships where the other partner withholds sex from them. And when it's the woman abusing the man, she'll often say things like, all you ever think about is sex. You just want sex. You always want sex. And this woman might have been withholding for months or a year or longer, but it could also happen where the man withholds the sex from the woman simply because he doesn't want to give her that pleasure. And he gets pleasure slut shaming her for asking for it. When the woman asks for the sex and the man doesn't want to give it out of control, then he's going to shame her for wanting to have sex. And so when you notice this sort of thing happening, when sex is being used as a currency, and there is a power and a control game behind it, it's not a healthy dynamic. Yeah, not a healthy dynamic. Anytime you see these red flags, walk away from that. You're not gonna fix that, and once you've engaged with someone at a sexual level, you have a whole other level of energetic connection with them. And it can be ever more destructive, and even separating with that person, it literally feels like flesh is being ripped apart, after you've had sex. So that's why it's usually better to enter slowly, not to have sex right away, get to know the person, make sure you really want to have sex with this person. Like you really would want to see this person long-term, because otherwise, if you don't have sex with them, because it's just a lot easier to separate. It still hurts when you get a little bit attached to someone and you separate, but it really rips apart after you've had a sexual relationship. And then, that also just opens you up psychically and energetically to a whole other level of connection. For a lot of women getting involved in a sexual relationship, the oxytocin, that bonding, the trust with that person. Now you're in really deep. Now you're imagining having babies with them or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, or you're imagining like pair bonding with them over long term, and the man doesn't have that same response, whether he's, a narcissist or not. The man doesn't have that same response usually because of the testosterone canceling out the oxytocin. But if you get into that dangerous spot where, you've already had sex with them, and now you're telling yourself that you're just going to stick with it, you're going to stick around a while because you've already had sex. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. Make sure you want to stick around for a while before getting to that point. Someone says, we have been married 22 years. He had a long emotional affair. We haven't fully recovered. Sex was great. Then he had ED again. Ugh, hand me my vibrator, but it's lonely. Wow. Yeah. So he had a long emotional affair. You guys haven't recovered your trust and whatnot, it sounds like. The erectile dysfunction, who knows what that's about right now, but he's definitely probably got some issues. Something psychologically is going on. And, sounds like you're still in it and you're feeling lonely and the stuff is still happening. You might want to think about getting out. I know it's been a really long time, but it's not a healthy situation. It's not going to be fixed. Like you don't just suddenly easily fix someone like that, and your love isn't going to save him. Your love isn't going to convert him suddenly to a great husband and partner. Someone says here, I really want to wait in my next relationship, but I feel like everyone is programmed to do it right away. How do I communicate? I want to wait for a true connection. Yeah, this is the hard part, and I recommend reading Steve Harvey's book, Think Like a Man, Act Like a Woman. He talks about it, like waiting 30 days. And, you might want to just flat out tell the person, honestly, like on the first date, maybe you guys are talking about things and it comes up, or something nearby, it comes up, and you segue it into the communication. Or maybe it suddenly gets really hot and heavy and you're like, this feels really good and stuff, but I really want to take it slow. Can we cuddle first? Can we get to know each other a little bit first? Can we, however you want to, I don't know exactly where you're coming from and what your own inner feeling is about that. And, all of that, I would express that authentically from your own heart. And I would also, if you're really into this person and you would like to do that down the road, I would also be sure to, show a sign of interest, like, can we cuddle and snuggle? I really want to feel you close to me. I want to get used to your energy near me. I want to feel what it's like to sleep next to you, but not with you, that sort of thing. However would feel authentic for you, but I would just bring it up. I would just say it at some point, whether it comes up in conversation or something nearby and you can segue in graciously, or if, he starts and things start getting hot and heavy. Now, if you express that and the person rejects that and pushes, leave. Unless for some reason you decide, okay, like if you decide you want to go ahead and do that, okay, but be really clear with yourself about your boundaries going in there. If it's a no, and it's a no, and it's a no, then you say no. And if he pushes, then you got to get out of there immediately. Like, don't sit around, don't talk about it, just get out. Just get out of the situation immediately. And so first and foremost, being really, really clear with yourself about what that boundary is and why, like why it's important to you, because he'll probably ask, he might ask for a reason or something, or an explanation. And maybe it's not in a manipulative way. Maybe he genuinely wants to know, this is interesting. It's normally we go on a date or two and like it goes right to that. This is interesting. I'm just curious why, you know, and maybe you can have a conversation about it. But if he's like aggressive with you, get out of there. You know, if anybody who has been through sexual abuse would know that it is very, very difficult to say that no when you want to say that no and someone is aggressing, you know, so you got to get really clear with yourself first about that boundary. If for some reason, you know, you're with this person and it's been several dates and in your mind you had imagined waiting longer, but it just feels right. Like it feels right. And again, that comes from your gut feeling, right? Your intuition. That's your barometer. Always trust that. If your intuition is like, no, then the answer is no. But if your intuition's like, okay, this feels safe, this feels good, for whatever reason it feels right, then it's okay. But listen to your gut and listen really carefully to your gut. Okay, someone says, after 20 years with this buffoon, still detangling, the thing giving me comfort is that I do not have to have a relationship beyond friendship ever again. I cannot conceive ever trusting my own judgment again. I will thrive, but the damage to my soul goes very deep. Initially, it feels like this. It feels like you can never trust someone again. It feels like you could never love someone again. It feels like you could never, you know, surrender your body to someone again in any sort of like sexual experience. It feels like your soul is crushed. I know, but it does get better over time with doing the inner work. It does get better. You can develop healthy, intimate connections with healthy people down the road. It's just that at the beginning, it's devastating. And at the beginning, it's part of the PTSD where you feel like nothing will ever be the same. It's not that different than a soldier coming back from war who feels like nothing will ever be the same, because it won't. It won't be exactly the same as it was before. You've had a lot of life experiences that have changed you, but you've also had a lot of learning experiences. And there's also a lot of things that you're learning about yourself. And you're also going to come out of that situation with a whole new level of strength that you never knew you had, you know, and you would be very surprised how resilient the human psyche is and what you can bounce back from, you know, with work over time. Someone says, that's my gut. Hurts though. My youngest child, 18, is headed to college and is the daddy's girl. But I know I can't stay in a marriage for my daughter. I hate to give up 22 years of history. A lot of times people stay because of that investment. Dr. Simon calls it the slot machine syndrome. You know, you ever go gambling where you put like money or coins or a card in the slot machine and you don't get up, you just keep pulling the lever, you keep hitting the button because you keep thinking the next one's going to be the jackpot. The next one's going to be the jackpot. I've already invested so much in this machine. If I get up, what if someone gets in here and gets the jackpot, you know, or like, how can I just get up after I've just invested all of this in the relationship? And that's one of the qualities that, you know, psychopaths, narcissists, and whatnot look for in a victim is, you know, do they have a high relationship investment? You know, are they willing to stick with it despite the problems because of how invested they are in their relationships? That's a positive quality, but it can be exploited. You know, and surely he is exploiting that. And that's one of the hardest things is like, oh, I invested this long in it. Yeah, 22 years is a really long time. Sometimes people have the same mentality after 2 years, after 2 months. Oh God, I wasted 22 months with this person and starting over again, or 2 years and starting over again. And it always feels like you can't start over again. It always feels like you're never going to have that same whatever with someone else. It always feels like you're never going to love again. Every time. And it's only because you're still in it, you know, or it's still very fresh right after. But that does change. It definitely does change over time. There's definitely hope for that. Someone says, still disentangling from the ex that is, he rushed me into a business with him in the idealization days, as they do. Yeah, that's dangerous. I got into one of those business deals. It wasn't romantic. It was just business. That's how I got hooked in with that sociopath. And that was a mess because I couldn't just walk away. And then he screwed me worse, you know, on leaving the business. divorce is like that. Divorce is like a business contract. You know, narcissists love to destroy that process, you know, to attack the person and hurt them even more through the divorce process. If you're trying to separate from a business, separate from a marriage contract, any sort of legal contract like that, you're best to get a really good attorney, you know, and hopefully that attorney is not a narcissist. You know, hopefully that attorney can see what's going on and really be on your side and educate yourself as much as you can, you know, to do the best that you can to get out of that situation. Oh, the woman followed up, I'd like to wait for sure. I want intimate connection, but I want the sex to come later. So you're really clear on your boundary, and then just be really clear with that person. You know, I wouldn't hesitate to say it. And if it gets to the point where it just comes up naturally because like he's, you know, now making moves on you, then, you know, just gently but firmly saying, you know, I really don't want to rush into the sex part. Can we, and then you name your thing, you know, can we snuggle? Can we talk? Can we get to know each other? However you want to say this, somewhere authentic within yourself, you know, I would use that instead. And again, because you're very clear on that boundary, if he pushes and insists, get out of there, because that's who he is. Someone says, I hear your words, kind lady, but I stand here shaking my head, long road ahead. You're the person with the business, right? Disentangling from the business. Yeah, it is a long road getting out, especially when there's like legal contracts, like marriages and businesses and homes owned. It's infinitely more, your children in custody, it's infinitely more complicated. Oh, in terms of loving again. Yeah, that's a long road. It really is, you know, but it does get better. I know it seems inconceivable at the beginning. In the same way it seemed when you were really, really in it, it seemed inconceivable to ever get out. It seemed like that situation was set in cement, casted in stone. There was no jackhammer that was going to get through that. It was for life. You were done. Like almost all of us, I think, felt like that at some point. We were totally trapped in that situation. And good point, right? So eventually, you know, you realize that it's not impossible. You can get out. There is an escape. You can make it. You can get out. And then you get out, and then you get to that next roadblock, which is, oh my God, nothing will ever be the same. Oh my God, how will I ever trust anyone? How will I ever trust myself? That was my thing. When I got out of the last major thing, what I finally realized that the core wound of all of this is the self-trust. Everything goes around that. The core wound is the self-trust. Because yeah, the other person deceived you, but more than anything, at some level, you know that you deceived yourself. At least that's what I was able to admit to myself. I realized I deceived myself. You know, I believed this person. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my intuition. I second guessed myself. I listened to what they were saying. I went along with what they were saying, but it does get better. You can rebuild the self-trust. It is a slow and gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a week or a month. It might happen in 6 months, but probably more like a year, possibly longer, you know, and you can't really put a stamp of time date on that because everyone is different, you know, and where you've come from before that too, like the nature of the complexity of the PTSD that has set in. Like if it was relationship after relationship after relationship back to childhood, which was my case, which was a very complex case of PTSD, that was a pretty bad case. It wasn't one relationship. It was like exponentialized, one after the other, left untreated, unrecognized over all that time. That was a big hole to climb out of, you know, but you can get out. You can get out. You can rebuild the self-trust. You can rebuild the self-esteem. You can rebuild the self-worth. You can rebuild the self-love, and you can foster healthy relationships moving forward. It will happen. I know it seems inconceivable at first, but trust me, it can happen. You just have to be willing to put in the work. Okay, someone says, I'm making small changes, applying for a distant job. I guess that's a big change. Yeah, this is the person who's in the long relationship. Good. Because those small changes are what happens at the beginning. It's like you can't do everything at once because it's overwhelming when it's been so long, especially. So you making these small but sure steps forward, 1 foot, right? 1 foot in front of the other, 1 step in front of the other. Yes, you are creating change. Have confidence in that. That's creating a momentum moving you forward versus the inertia before where you were stuck and couldn't go anywhere. and now you are. He may follow, maybe, I think I'm okay either way. I'm not chasing him. Yeah, don't chase him. Don't fight for him. Don't try to win him over. If you have an opportunity to get far away, take that as your opportunity to run, just to get away, to get far away. And, good girl, like creating your financial security and stuff, like looking for another job, getting a job far away from all that. That's excellent idea. Excellent idea. Awesome. Well, I guess we're almost 2 hours now, so I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for sharing, your vulnerability and your struggles and your stories here. I'm sure this is going to help other people listening later. You're welcome. And I'm sending you all a big hug, and I hope to see you soon.